serdecznie w Łazienkach Królewskich w to poniedziałkowe popołudnie. Dzisiaj zaczynamy, można chyba tak powiedzieć, nasze jesienne spotkania wykładowe i trochę nietypowo dziś, ponieważ wykład pana ambasadora Irlandii o dotyczącej niedawno zakończonej wystawy w galerii plenerowej Łazienek Królewskich, czyli Dawniej, obcy, dziś, sąsiedzi. Dzisiaj takie rozwinięcie tego tematu i wydaje się, że jesteśmy w idealnym miejscu do takiego zastanowienia się nad naszymi kontaktami polsko-irlandzkimi, bo jesteśmy w Łazienkach Królewskich w Pałacu na Wyspie, gdzie właśnie w XVIII wieku ta tożsamość narodu polskiego się kształtowała, to myślenie o narodzie, ale też i kontaktach Polski z zagranicą. I nie tylko Łazienki Królewskie właśnie są tą historią przesycone dawnymi kontaktami, ale są również miejscem reprezentacji państwa w dniu dzisiejszym. I trochę właśnie do tej reprezentacji państwa, do tego miejsca spotkań dzisiejszych polityków też będziemy oczywiście nawiązywać. Panie ambasadorze, Mr. Ambassador, I'm leaving you the space for the lecture. Dziękuję bardzo i zapraszam na wspaniały wieczór z panem ambasadorem.
Well, good evening everybody. Witam Państwa bardzo serdecznie. Jestem bardzo zadowolony, że mogę być tu dziś, but I'm going to speak in English and not inflict my poor Polish on you. I'd like to thank Izabela Zichowicz, the director of the Royal Łazienki Museums, for the introduction. It's a real pleasure and indeed I think an honor to be speaking in such a beautiful and such an historic location as Pałac na Wyspie. With its many important associations with the dinners which King Stanislaw Augustus Poniatowski had in this palace, the Thursday dinners, where he met and discussed with people different ideas. And I think it's wonderful that the museum continues that tradition by having a lecture series here in this palace in which speakers from different backgrounds are invited to share their thoughts and their perspectives. And so this evening, I'm going to say a few words to you about the history of the relationships between Ireland and Poland, between Irish and Polish people. And I use the word in English in the plural deliberately, relationships, because it's a story of connections and intersections, sometimes unlikely ones, sometimes surprising ones, that over the centuries have woven the relationship that we talk about today when we think about the close ties that exist between Ireland and Poland. But it wasn't always this way. Ireland and Poland are on opposite ends of the European continent. So I'll talk to you a little bit about the early days of the relationship, some of the early historical connections. It's often said that Irish people and Polish people are kindred spirits, that they are similar in their temperaments. People talk about two peoples who, although they're on other sides of the European map, have much in common. A shared experience of loss of self-rule and struggle in the past is one of those that is sometimes a love of politics, literature, the arts and music, a desire for liberty, the experience of being émigrés, of being strangers in someone else's land. All of these are themes which are frequently mentioned when we talk about the Irish experience and the Polish experience. But for long periods in the history of Irish-Polish connections, we can talk about not connections between countries, but between people. In recent decades, the Irish and Polish peoples and states have formed very deep and lasting bonds, and today Ireland is home to a very large Polish community, and I'll talk to you a little bit about them at the end. As the director mentioned last month, here at the museum in the open-air gallery, the embassy was very proud to partner with the museum to display a history exhibition. I think some of the screens are on display here this evening that talk about the history of connections between Ireland and Poland from the 17th and 18th centuries to the present day. And I'd like to just say a word of thanks to the director for the museum, Professor Zbigniew Wawar, for agreeing to host our exhibition and also for the invitation to be here tonight. And then also Jagna Lewandowska, exhibition coordinator, and Piotr Skowronski from the Center for Research, who is going to be looking after the Q&A session later this evening. So let's get going. We Irish are good at telling stories. Our own stories for sure, but also those of others. And it was an Irishman who was the first to tell the Polish story in the English language. When Bernard O'Connor published his 2-volume History of Poland, its ancient and present states, in the year 1698. And there's an original copy of O'Connor's history in the National Library in Plac Krasiński, which I had the great pleasure to visit and to view last year. Now, O'Connor was an interesting man. He was a native of Kerry, which, for those of you who know Ireland, is in the southwest, and some would say one of the most beautiful parts of the island. But he came here to work in Warsaw as a doctor. He was a physician for King Jan Sobieski III. And so he worked with the king at the royal palace in Wilanów. When the king's sister fell ill, the 14 royal doctors were asked to advise on a course of treatment, and 13 of those doctors said the problem was one thing, and Bernard O'Connor said the problem was something else and required a different course of treatment. Unfortunately for the princess, the 13 doctors were listened to and the lady passed away, and when the post-mortem was carried out, it was proven that O'Connor's prognosis had been correct. And so he became trusted by the king as a result of this, so that when the king's daughter, Princess Teresa Kunigunda, was to travel to Brussels from Warsaw to be married to a Saxon prince, Jan Sobieski entrusted his daughter to Bernard O'Connor, and he was asked to accompany her and the courtiers to travel on the journey from Warsaw to Brussels, which back at the end of the 17th century would have taken many, many months. When he had delivered the princess to her groom in Brussels, he traveled on to London, where he wrote his history, and it was published in the year 1698. If you look at it, it's perhaps more like a travelogue as we understand it today than a pure history. It describes what he witnessed during his time at the court in Warsaw, but also his journeys throughout the Commonwealth and the days of its glory years, really. And he set that out in a book, and it's the first history that was published in the English language. And it was translated subsequently into German, into Latin, and eventually into Polish. And for 50 years, it was the only work of its kind in English. And so it was the primary source for people who had English as their first language to encounter Poland. 20 years after Connor wrote his book, the granddaughter of King Jan Sobieski III, Maria Klementyna Sobieska, married James Francis Edward Stuart in 1718. Now, he was the son of King James II of England, and therefore also the King of Scotland and the King of Ireland, who had been deposed and exiled from England in 1688. At the time, the question of who should be the rightful monarch in Britain was a subject of disagreement amongst the courts of Europe, and Pope Clement IX regarded the Stuart family as the rightful heirs. And so he recognized James Francis Stuart as the King of England, Scotland, and Ireland, and therefore he recognized Maria Klementyna as Queen of Ireland. Before she could claim her title, she had to marry the Stuart pretender. So she journeyed to Italy, but she was intercepted in Innsbruck in Austria on the orders of the British King, George I of the Hanover family, who wanted to prevent this marriage taking place, as he feared that it would strengthen the Jacobite claim to the throne on which he was sitting in London. So Maria Klementyna was imprisoned in Innsbruck, but an Irish soldier called Charles Wogan was sent to rescue her. It's quite a fairy tale story. He managed to outwit the Austrians who were guarding the princess to take her safely to Rome, where she got married. So she succeeded in marrying the Jacobite pretender, but unfortunately she never had on her shoulders the Irish crown, or that of England or Scotland. though her grandson would become a famous figure in Scottish and British history as Bonnie Prince Charlie, who led an unsuccessful revolt against the British monarchy in 1745 and was defeated. So these two surprising intersections between Ireland and Poland at the end of the 17th, beginning of the 18th century, are interesting to hear about. But I mentioned at the beginning that there was mostly personal connections at this time. There was no established pattern of engagement between Ireland and Poland, and for many decades, the two countries were unknown to one another. Irish merchant vessels tended to journey south towards Spain, Portugal, and the Mediterranean ports, whilst those of Poland tended to go west along the Baltic, and so Scotland was a country that had a greater relationship with Poland during this period than had Ireland. An exception was an Irish gardener called Denis McClare, who made a name for himself in Poland as Dawniej Mikler. Now, the young McClare came to Poland in 1790 at the invitation of Princess Izabela Czartoryska, who wanted to introduce the then fashionable English style of landscape gardening to her Polish estates. McClare came, he intended to stay only for a short period, hoping to find his father John, who he thought was serving in the Polish army. His father had been involved in a rebellion against British rule in Ireland 20 years earlier, which had not succeeded, and so he had fled east and had found work working in the army of the Polish king. So his son, Denis, traveled across Europe, started working for Princess Czartoryska on her Puławy estate. He made a name for himself, and Princess Czartoryska introduced him to Princess Helena Radziwiłł, and he went and designed the very famous Arcadia estate near Lublin. He Polonized his name to Dawniej Mikler and designed gardens for the next 40 years for the Polish aristocracy, including the Lubomirski, Potocki, Sobański, and Orłowski families. Much of his work was in the Lubelski, Wołyń, and Podole regions of Poland at that time. In all, he designed around 50 gardens, of which many have survived to this day. And during the rising of Tadeusz Kosciuszko in 1794, he helped to smuggle money from Princess Helena Radziwiłł to Kosciuszko to help him with his rebellion. It's only towards the end of the 18th century that we begin to see parallels drawn between Poland and Ireland in Ireland. So far, the journey has all been from Ireland to Poland. The parallels become drawn by Irish nationalists hoping to create a separate Irish state from Britain. The first to draw these links are an organization called the United Irishmen, who were founded in 1791 with a mission to unite in Ireland Catholics, Protestants, and dissenters behind the cause of Irish liberty and self-rule from London. How to reconcile the different traditions on the island of Ireland is a defining theme in Irish history. It was natural, therefore, that those who wanted to achieve this should show interest in how Poland, that other multi-faith polity at the end of the 18th century, had arranged its affairs. For the United Irishmen, Poland was an example to be followed. A gathering was held in Belfast in 1792 to celebrate the Polish Constitution of the 3rd of May. The organization's newspaper, the Northern Star, told its readers about the Constitution, "We cannot sufficiently admire the judgment, the ability, the policy which it displays on every page." In his pamphlet, An Argument on Behalf of the Catholics of Ireland, the leader of the United Irishmen, a man called Theobald Wolfe Tone, cited Poland as an example of a country in which a Catholic population espoused the cause of liberty and in which cooperation and religious tolerance between faiths had been achieved. Wolfe Tone hoped that a similar model could be applied in Ireland. I mentioned the Kosciuszko Rising. The Rising of 1794 and the final third partition that followed it aroused deep sympathies amongst the United Irishmen and Wolfe Tone in particular in Ireland. And the Kosciuszko Rising inspired Tone to lead a rising similarly in Ireland 4 years later in 1798 to throw off English rule from London, which suffered a similar fate. The rebellion was defeated, the forces supporting it were scattered, and Wolfe Tone was arrested and tried for treason. And in his speech from the dock in Dublin, having been condemned to death, Wolfe Tone invoked the spirit of Kosciuszko and his call to arms. Parallels were drawn between Kosciuszko and Robert Emmet, who led a similarly unsuccessful rising in Ireland 5 years later. And this was a parallel which the Polish poet Maria Konopnicka would evoke a century later when she wrote a poem in 1908 called Robert Emmet's Kiss. In the century that followed, these failed risings in both Ireland and Poland were accorded heroic status. The pattern of historical experience for Poles and Irish under their respective rulers were different, of course. Conditions differed among the three partitions and between all of them and conditions in Ireland. But there was enough similarity to convince nationalists in Ireland and Poland that theirs were parallel causes. Of course, in both countries there were traditions of seeking autonomy and eventual independence through constitutional and non-violent means as well, and these competed with the use of physical force. There are parallels between the Young Ireland movement in Ireland and the Młoda Polska movement here in Poland, the romantic literature which accompanied both. A poem in an Irish nationalist newspaper published in 1683 during the uprising here in Poland referred to Ireland as Poland of the seas. And a few years later, a famous history was published about Ireland in 1880. It picked up the parallels with Poland as well, referring to Ireland as the Western Poland, the Poland of the seas. In the year 1863, a number of Irish members of Parliament travelled to Poland to investigate the uprising and conditions under the Russian partition. The cruelty with which the rising was suppressed in the Russian partition in particular convinced many Irish nationalists that only through self-reliance and not foreign aid could independence for Ireland be secured. Of course, the intersections that did exist between Ireland and Poland and between Poles and Irish people were not defined solely by nationalism. The story of Paweł Edmund Strzelecki and the many lives he saved during Ireland's Great Famine is only now being properly told. One of Poznan's famous sons, Strzelecki is perhaps best known for being an explorer who named a mountain in Australia after Kosciuszko. What is less known is his work as a famine relief organizer in Ireland. In the middle of the 19th century, we suffered a terrible potato famine in which 1 million people died of starvation and 1 million people were forced to emigrate, mostly to North America. At the time, Ireland had a population of 8 million people. It was the fifth most populous country in Europe at that time. And 5 years later, that population had fallen by 2 million and continued to fall. And to this day, there are still less people living on the island of Ireland than there were in 1845 as a result of this famine. It was a disaster. It led to effectively the collapse of society and the end of the Irish language as the native vernacular language in Ireland, because the people who spoke Irish were the poorest people, and when they emigrated, English became associated with modernity and Irish with the horror of the famine and hunger. Paweł Strzelecki was struck by the suffering in Ireland during this time, and he came to Dublin in 1847 to raise funds to assist with famine relief. It's estimated that he raised over £250,000, which is an enormous amount of money back then, and that his efforts contributed to saving about 200,000 lives. He's left a harrowing account of what he witnessed. 3 years ago, Strzelecki's life-saving work was recognized when a memorial was unveiled in Dublin's main thoroughfare, O'Connell Street, on the site of the house in which he lived, and records the gratitude of the Irish people for this Polish man who came to Ireland in its darkest hour to save lives. In the field of literature, there were many contacts in the 19th century. There was the influence of Thomas More on the poet Adam Mickiewicz, who translated More's famous poem, The Meeting of the Waters, and said it was only through More's writings that he could feel the beauty of the English language. 3 of More's Irish melodies were translated by that other great giant of Polish poetry, Juliusz Słowacki. In the musical sphere, there was the influence of John Field on Frédéric Chopin. Field was born in Dublin in 1782 and was considered the greatest pianist of his day. He began composing at the age of 9 and gave concerts in Paris, London, Vienna, and St. Petersburg by the time he was a teenager. And he spent most of his life working at the Russian court in Petersburg. Field became associated with the nocturne, a form of musical composition that he developed and made popular. And it was from Field that Frédéric Chopin took the nocturne and made it his own. Field then expanded on the form to create a unique sound of his own. Sadly for Field, Chopin has become much more famous as both a pianist and as a composer of the nocturne, but it's safe to say that had Field not developed the form in at first, perhaps Chopin would not have been so successful. The experience of the start of the First World War in 1914 transformed the political situation in both Poland and in Ireland, of course. Polish newspapers reported the outbreak of the Easter Rising in Dublin in 1916, an event which started Ireland's journey towards independence 5 years later. The rebellion was initially unpopular in Dublin, and the Polish newspapers focused on the parallels with Poland in their reporting. And a key figure in the way they reported about the rising in newspapers here in Poland was the figure of Konstanz Markiewicz, the rebel countess who was one of the leaders of the revolution in Dublin in 1916. Konstanz Markiewicz is an interesting figure. She was married to a Polish count. We think he was a count. His title to nobility has never been found. From the eastern part of Poland in today's Ukraine. She was the first woman member of parliament and the first woman minister in government. When the revolution broke out in 1916, the journal Świat referred to her as a modern Irish Amazon and drew Poland between Ireland and Poland. Some wondered if her journey towards Irish nationalism had been influenced by her Polish husband. And around the period 1907-1910, Konstanz Markiewicz spent a lot of time in what's now Western Ukraine, on her Polish husband's estate, learning about the conditions under which Polish communities were living in the Russian partition. There is a theory that perhaps this was one of the experiences which led her to embrace nationalism and eventually the cause of Irish independence from British rule. She remains a symbol of Irish-Polish ties, and there is a school named after her in Bemowo here in Warsaw. For many Irish nationalists at the turn of the 20th century, the resurrection of a free and unpartitioned Poland was a just cause as important as that of Ireland and its claim to self-rule. In the year 1918, the Irish suffragette and trade union leader Louis Bennett addressed a meeting of the Irish Women's International League and said that surely Ireland of the East would support Poland of the West in their bids for independence when the peace conference gathered at the end of the war. And when the Irish declared independence from Britain in 1919, an appeal was made directly to the new Polish state for support. An appeal was written to the Sejm. This document, which is written in Polish, can be viewed at the Adam Mickiewicz University in Poznan. There's a copy of it there in the library. Unfortunately for Ireland, at that time the Polish state was busy securing its own independence against the Bolshevik army and was not in a position to assist Ireland. And in the early years of the 20th century, when both Ireland and Poland were starting off their paths as reborn states, the focus was on building at home, and there was relatively little contact between the two countries. Our continents separated us, and although we sat together in the League of Nations in Geneva, each country was preoccupied with creating institutions of state and rebuilding the economy free from outside interference. The first Polish diplomatic presence was established in Dublin in the year 1929 under Tadeusz Wacław Dobrzyński as Consul General. In a far cry from today, the Polish community could fit inside a single Dublin church in 1930 for the first official celebrations on the 3rd of May. Dobrzyński's career in Ireland would span 25 years, representing the Second Republic, and then the London-based government in exile during the dark years of the Second World War and their aftermath. If there was no Irish embassy in Poland at this time, an Irish diplomat, Sean Lester, would play an important role as League of Nations High Commissioner in Gdansk in the years 1933 to 36. Lester was one of the first foreign officials to warn of the dangers posed by Nazism and to protest the persecution of the city of Gdansk's Polish and Jewish communities while he was working for the League of Nations in the city. Lester has been today honored by the city of Gdansk, where the city council now sits in the building in which he lived and worked while he was in the employment of the League of Nations, and his portrait hangs in the headquarters of the Irish Foreign Ministry in Dublin. During the Second World War, Ireland was a neutral country. But here in Warsaw, an Irish woman, Eileen Frances Short-Garlinska, served as a nurse during the Warsaw Uprising with the Kryska group in Czerniaków, near here. She survived the uprising and afterwards escaped to Britain, where she worked as a translator for the government in exile. Her husband was Józef Galinski, a senior figure in the underground resistance. There is a plaque in her memory at the Field Cathedral of the Polish Army in Warsaw, where the embassy lays a wreath every year on the 1st of August. After the war, there were approaches from the Warsaw-based communist government to establish diplomatic relations. But Ireland chose instead to maintain relations with the government in exile, and would do so until 1958. For a period, there was even speculation that the government in London might eventually have to move to Ireland, and official soundings were made in Dublin. Ireland engaged in post-war relief work, starting most in Western Europe, but by 1946, Irish food relief was being shipped to the port of Gdynia, and funds were given by the Irish government to the International Red Cross here in Poland. Plans were also developed to rebuild one of Warsaw's hospitals. There was discussion again about the possibility of opening an Irish embassy in Warsaw. But weighing against this at the time were reports coming about persecution and repression within Poland as the communist authorities asserted their rule. And there was a strong reluctance in the Irish state to recognize a communist country. Soundings were taken in Rome with Cardinal August Hlond, who had visited Ireland in 1932, and with Pope Pius XII. And following these consultations, a decision was taken not to recognize the People's Republic, but instead to maintain relations with the London government in exile. This decision was not without its costs when Warsaw joined the Soviet veto on Ireland's UN membership in 1946, which would block Ireland joining the UN for a decade. And unfortunately, as the Cold War division of Europe took hold, plans to develop ties between Ireland and Poland to reconstruct a hospital here in Warsaw had to be abandoned. During these years, Ireland became a temporary home for hundreds of Polish soldiers and airmen from the Home Army. They came to study at Irish universities at the request of the government in exile, the first group arriving in 1946. The drive to bring them to Ireland came from a university in the city of Cork in southwest Ireland. And for the Irish government, this was an opportunity to show solidarity with Poland. Students went to study in the cities of Dublin and Galway as well. A Polish house was even established in the city of Cork where Polish students lived, providing a focus for Polish activities. And for a while, this new Polish connection in Ireland thrived, but it would prove to be short-lived. Most of the students moved on after they had finished studying, finding new lives in Britain and the United States, and very few of them remained in Ireland when the scheme came to an end in 1962. This is a little-known episode in Irish-Polish history, and it reminds me that the history of our engagement is richer than we might suppose, but it's also a reminder of the importance of working to maintain people-to-people contacts, which can falter if they're not sustained. In another little-known connection, some of the papers from the archives of the Polish Ministry of Foreign Affairs were housed in Dublin for safekeeping from 1943 until 1959, when they were transferred to the Hoover Institute in Stanford, where they continue to rest today. Another, again, was the government in exile's proposal to create a Polish Cultural Institute in Ireland, A conference was held in Dublin in 1946 to discuss the idea, but the conditions in Poland meant that few people were allowed to leave to travel to Ireland, and the idea did not get off the ground. One of those who did make it to Dublin was Jan Łuszkiewicz, a former rector of Warsaw University and the founder of the acclaimed Lwów School of Mathematical Logic. And he would lecture at Irish universities until his death in 1956, transferring some of the Polish tradition of mathematics and science to Irish universities. Ireland was one of the last countries to recognize the government in exile. Dobzhinsky remained Consul General in Dublin until 1945, and 1954. And his daughter has published a biography of her father, An Unusual Diplomat, in 1998, in which he recounts the work he did for Poland and for Ireland. When Dobzhinsky retired, he was replaced by Zofia Zaleska, who was sister-in-law of August Zaleski, then president of the government in exile. But formal relations with the government came to an end in March of 1958 when the Polish consulate in Dublin closed. And for some years after, there were no connections or relations between Ireland and Poland. Ireland did not establish diplomatic relations with the People's Republic until relatively late in 1976. But there was no Irish embassy in Warsaw or Polish embassy in Dublin. Contact was limited, with little real engagement between governments. Things were different on the football pitch, with the Irish and Polish teams playing throughout the decades of communist rule. Indeed, Ireland has played more football matches against Poland than any other country, which surprised me when I found this. A total of 27 matches in total. The first match was played here in Warsaw in 1938. And the most recent encounter was here in Warsaw again in October of 2015. For those with an interest in football, the tally is in Poland's favor, but that doesn't stop us being friends. And we warmly remember in Ireland still the welcome that was given to Irish fans who travelled to Poland in 2012 for the Euro Championships, particularly to Poznan and to Gdansk. And every time I travel to both places, people still talk to me about the Irish fans and the reputation for friendship which they developed during their time here. When I think about this, I'm reminded about the power of sport and its importance in building relationships between countries. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. I said that there was no formal engagement or relationship between the two governments. But there was a lot of sympathy and interest in Ireland for Poland, particularly during the military rule period at the start of the 1980s. The Solidarity movement captured the public imagination in Ireland, and there was an outpouring of sympathy and support when martial law was imposed in December '81. Despite a difficult economic situation in Ireland at the time, Ireland pledged a large contribution to the EEC's food and aid programme to Poland, while charities and church organisations raised over £500,000, which would be about €1.6 million today, to help. Protests were held outside the Soviet embassy in Dublin. There was no Polish embassy in Dublin. And the Irish government worked with EEC members to shape a common response to events. A key mover in this was the Irish-Polish Society, which had been founded in Dublin in 1979. It was influential in raising food aid and other assistance that was shipped to Poland to help with those affected by the imposition of martial law. Artists and musicians also pledged their support. U2's famous New Year's Day was dedicated by lead singer Bono to Lech Wałęsa, who was interned at the time the song was first recorded. It was the historic change of 1989 that opened a new era for Poland, but also created the opportunity to start a real relationship with countries such as Ireland. The Irish government opened an office in Warsaw in the autumn of 1989, which became an embassy the following spring, and the Polish embassy opened its doors in Dublin a year later in 1991. From the beginning, Ireland supported Poland's wish to join the European Union. Having benefited from membership ourselves, we believed the benefit should be extended to the countries of Central Europe. To help Poland prepare for a membership, the Irish government began a scheme in 1992 to bring Polish officials to Ireland to work in Irish ministries to share our experience of working with the European Union structures. This scheme ran for 16 years, and hundreds of Polish officials came to Ireland during this time. New opportunities were created for Polish and Irish people to travel, to meet each other and to get to know. I was one of them. I visited Poland for the first time as a university student in the summer of 1990 as a backpacker with an Interrail ticket. I had tried to come here in the summer of 1989, but it was impossible to get a visa that summer. I got as far as Budapest, but no further. So the following summer I came back and started in Budapest and traveled east and spent a lot of time here in Poland, then on to Czechoslovakia and in Berlin a week before German reunification. And at that time, I had no idea that I was going to choose a career in diplomacy, let alone have the privilege of coming back here as ambassador 25 years later. And when I look at my photographs from then, and I look at, well, myself today, but Poland today, it's incredible to see the transformation in this country, which is, I would say, a credit to the Polish people to have achieved. We're proud in Ireland that it was in Dublin that Poland formally became a member of the European Union on the 1st of May, along with the 9 other countries who joined in the year 2004. Membership of the European Union has done more to bring Poland and Ireland together than anything in the 300 years before it. As members of the EU, we work together on so many ways. We meet in Brussels every week. There is exchange between Polish and Irish officials across the board. It's brought us together in ways which could not have been imagined by earlier generations. We're proud in Ireland too that we decided to open our labour market to the citizens of new member states in 2004 and did not put in place any restrictions on Polish people coming to live or work in Ireland. And in the years that followed, tens of thousands of Polish women and Polish men have come to Ireland to live, to work, and to study. And a great many of them have stayed put. In fact, today, we estimate that there are about 150,000 Polish people living in Ireland, which makes you about 2.5% of the Irish population, the largest foreign community, and Polish, the most spoken foreign language in Ireland. Poles are a feature of everyday life. Our friends, our neighbors, our colleagues at work, and increasingly, because people are marrying, members of our families. And the community is really very welcome. You can hear Polish spoken on the street of most cities. It's not an exaggeration. And when I started learning Polish, it was only then that I realized this is what I was hearing around me in the streets. To celebrate the contribution which the Polish community makes to Irish life, the Irish government sponsors an annual festival called Polska Era. Era is the Irish word for Ireland, so Poland-Ireland Festival. It's a week-long festival of events which takes place across Ireland to celebrate cultural, sport, business, political, but most of all, people-to-people connections between the Polish community and the wider Irish community. The presence of a Polish community has transformed relations. At the start, 10 years ago, it meant there was a daily bus service from Dublin to Warsaw. I think it took about 48 hours back then to do the journey. This became followed quickly by Polish language newspapers, the appearance of Polish food in our supermarkets, and the now everyday sight of the Polski sklep on Irish high streets. The daily bus service is long gone, replaced by over 60 flights a week between Ireland and 12 Polish airports. So Ireland and Poland are now more closely connected than at any time in history. There's a dynamic and growing trade relationship that's worth 3.4 billion euro a year and has been growing by 15% every year for the past 4 years. There's a new generation growing up in Ireland who are both Irish and Polish. There is an estimated 25,000 children living in Ireland whose parents are Polish. So, such a new phenomenon, we don't really know how to describe these people. Are they Irish-Polish? Are they Polish-Irish? We don't know. But when I think of what this means, a generation of young women and young men who are going to grow up speaking Polish and English and whose identity is both Irish and Polish, I'm pretty confident for the future of relations. And among the many Poles who have lived in Ireland and returned home to Poland, some have brought with them children born in Ireland who are also Irish citizens. So these young people and their families are a new part of our global diaspora, and a Polish-speaking one too. And these Polish people who have come home are helping to build bridges between Ireland and Poland as well. I look forward to the day when this new generation, comfortable with being both Irish and Polish, will play their part in developing ties between Ireland and Poland. Perhaps in the next few years we'll see Polish names on the back of our sports jerseys. And maybe one day, if you come to a lecture in the future, maybe the ambassador of Ireland will have a Polish family name here in Warsaw. One thing is certain, the Irish government is committed to working with Polish people who've lived, worked or studied in Ireland and returned home. We've created an organisation called Network Irlandii, which helps Polish people who've come back home to maintain a connection with Ireland. In my view, we're living through the most sustained and intensive period in Irish-Polish relations in 400 years. I like to think that the Polish community in Ireland has become the Poland of the West that Irish nationalists spoke about 200 years ago. And the small but growing number of Irish people living here in Poland, as well as the new generation of dual Irish-Polish people, are the Ireland of the East living here. I think when we reflect that this has been achieved so smoothly in such a short period of time and in such a spirit of friendship and cooperation, it's something which I think Irish and Polish people can together take pride in. When the historians of the future gather, they will be able to tell this remarkable story and how it was achieved. So on that note, I'd like to stop. I'd like to thank you for your attention, for listening to this brief summary of the many connections that have grown between Ireland and Poland over the last 400 years. And if there are any comments or any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Now we have time for discussion. Questions may be either in Polish or in English, so I will pass the microphone and let me speak in Polish now. Szanowni Państwo, mamy teraz czas na dyskusję. Pytania do pana ambasadora mogą być po polsku, panie tłumaczki będą tłumaczyć, więc słucham Państwa.
Dziękuję. Takie krótkie techniczne pytanko, ponieważ to był bardzo interesujący wykład. Czy możemy go znaleźć w formie jakiejś broszury albo na przykład na stronie internetowej Ambasady Irlandii?
Okay. Would you mind repeating the question? I didn't hear it.
Okay, my question is...
Hello.
Just here. Okay, the question was whether the lecture was so interesting whether you might possibly make it public somewhere at some website or something.
Okay, yes. Okay, well, first of all, thank you for your interest in it. Yes, it would be my pleasure to do so. We'll put it up on the website of the embassy, which is very easy to find online, dfa.ie/Poland. But it'll be available from tomorrow on the embassy's website.
Tak, a nagranie też będzie dostępne na stronie Łazienek na naszym YouTubie.
Hello, Mr. Ambassador. So you've maintained a lot of beautiful words about Poland, Polish people, and I'd like to know what's your personal, one thing that you love about Poland and our culture, I don't know, something like this. So what's the one thing you love about us, about our country?
Well, it's difficult to say only one thing. What do I like about Poland? There are many, many things that I like about living here. The first thing I like is the great variety in your cities. They are so rich historically. I was in Poznan yesterday for an event there. I think Poznan has perhaps one of the most beautiful ryneks in Poland. I was in Lublin a couple of months ago, an amazingly pretty and underrated city in Poland, I think. Would make a wonderful weekend destination if more people knew about it. I think the history that you have in the built environment is incredible. It's very different to how Irish cities and towns developed. We didn't have this Magdeburg system where cities were laid out in the early modern period with market squares and city walls and rules. Our towns tended to develop in a slightly less planned way. And so they look different. And so for me, it's very interesting to travel around Poland and to see how the built environment developed here differently to Ireland for sure, but also the regional differences within this country are fascinating. I am a fan of the cuisine here. I particularly like gołąbki in winter, very nice dish. That for me is really interesting as well. So I think enjoying the cultural difference, the fact that, on the one hand, we're in Europe, there are so many things that we have in common, but the diversity in Europe is its charm as well, and the diversity within Poland. It's a big country, and there is so much to see and explore that I've been here 2.5 years, but I fear I've only scratched the surface. So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Czy ktoś z Państwa jeszcze?
Will you please share your opinion about how the Brexit might eventually influence the cooperation between our countries, between Poland and Ireland, if that will be, of course, the case?
Yeah, sure. Okay. Well, it's a very good question. I suppose the first thing I would say is that we in Ireland are very disappointed that the United Kingdom has opted to leave the European Union. We joined together on the same day in 1973. And although you asked me about Ireland and Poland, just a very quick word about Ireland and the United Kingdom. Back in 1973, the relationship between Ireland and the UK was a rather unequal one. They were a very big country with a very strong economy. We were a very small country with a very weak economy. And we were very, I would say, inward-looking country at that time. And working together as equal members in the European Union was an important influence that has transformed the relationship between Ireland and Britain over the last 4 decades to the situation we have today, where there is a very close relationship between the two countries. So we regret that they have chosen to leave, though of course we respect the outcome of the democratic vote in the referendum that was had there. We hope very much that the outcome of the negotiations which have just started will be the closest possible future relationship between the European Union and the UK once it has left in all areas. In the negotiations, Ireland is on the EU team of negotiations, so the EU 27, and of course Poland is there too. And what I think it will mean is that Ireland will be cooperating with the other 26 member states even more than perhaps it has in the past. But already we have a pretty close dialogue with Poland on a number of issues where there is a similar view, for example, on the importance of completing the single market within the European Union, on the importance of the digital economy, on the importance of the right balance between regulation and free market. So I think there will be more cooperation between Ireland and Poland in the future, partly as a result of the UK leaving. But what I hope is that whatever form the UK's exit eventually takes, it will still be possible for there to be pretty close cooperation with the UK as well.
Szanowni Państwo, czy mamy jeszcze pytania? Nie widzę. W takim razie bardzo serdecznie dziękuję panu ambasadorowi za przybycie do Łazienek i chciałem zaprosić Państwa także na inne wykłady organizowane tutaj w Łazienkach. Już jutro pani dyrektor Izabela Zychowicz będzie wygłaszała wykład o Janie Bogumile Plerszu, osobie, która wymalowała nam tę salę. a 11 października mamy takie wielkie otwarcie naszych nowych cykli wykładowych, które się od jesieni zaczynają, więc 11 października w Teatrze Królewskim w Starej Oranżerii będziemy opowiadać o czarodziejskim flecie. Wykład będzie połączony z koncertem. Serdecznie Państwa zapraszamy. Ja jeszcze raz dziękuję Panu ambasadorowi.
Dziękuję.
Hello, how are you?
Developed a strange feeling like we shared a sense of humor.